with the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we will have half an hour of business news and analysis. On today's show, China's auto exports jump over 30% in the first 2 months of this year. What are the main factors? And we will also discuss whether Japan's economy is at a turning point. And now let's begin with our top story. China's auto exports jumped over 30% yearly in the first 2 months of this year. Data from the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers shows that the exports of new energy vehicles expanded 7.5% yearly to over 180,000 units, while the exports of traditional fossil fuel vehicles are up 39%. Experts say China's auto industry is showing strong competitiveness in the global market and is likely to maintain sound momentum. Meanwhile, China's tech giant Xiaomi says it will deliver its first electric vehicle this month. The company says it has 59 stores in nearly 30 cities across China to take orders. So for more on this, join us on the line now are Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, and also Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novim Archi Technologies. So yeah, I will start with you. China's auto exports surged over 30%, in the first 2 months of this year. So what are the main factors behind China's auto exports continue to surge for this year?
Right. So I think China has surpassed Japan to become the largest automobile exporter last year. China exported 4.91 million last year. Automobiles. And so this year, I think the trend is going to continue. Some of the biggest reason, I think, is, China has explored many overseas markets, especially in the global South countries, that really help to jump up, the overall exports to countries like Brazil, South Africa, Vietnam, Indonesia, India. And so among these exports, I think automobile exports also, take up a large share. And one of the reasons is, these overseas market welcome Chinese automobiles for the high quality and also the affordability and also the availability of after-sales services like maintenance and so on. And so that really give, Chinese automobile exports a competitive advantage. And I think going forward, I think China's EV will still also have many overseas markets to be explored. And of course, the Western markets are still relatively closed, especially the United States. But at the same time, I think, with China's competitiveness in the automobile sector and with overseas market expansion, it's likely that, China's automobile exports are going to continue to go up. Not to mention, countries like Russia, for example, last year has imported a lot of the Chinese vehicles. I think so. Some of these Western strategies of, trying to keep Chinese automobiles at bay, especially EV, I think those are going to really become, infeasible. Not only because that would hurt their consumers, but also that would slow down their green transition.
So, Jiahe, what proportion of China's cars are EVs right now? Because Chinese consumers have shown increasing interest in the new energy vehicles in the past several years, right? So how have China's EV industries become so competitive, not only in China, but also in the global market?
Well, I think if you look at the new sold electric vehicles right now, I think they're taking about, I'm not sure I got the exact number, but that's about 30 to 40% of the new selling cars are new energy vehicles right now. So it's quite many, close to half. And if you look at the remaining number, that's about 10% because, the new energy vehicle has been started only for these like 3 or 4 years. So there are still quite a lot of traditional cars remaining right over there. And the reason that China has got, well, I think perhaps the world's most successful new energy vehicle is basically because, Chinese government has actually believed that the new energy vehicle will be the future of our way of transportation. It is, easier to design. It's much more friendly to the environment, especially when we talk about the air quality in metropolises. If you use all the EVs, you reduce a lot of pollution, and that's really good for people's health. So that's very important things, and that also reduces China's dependency on the import of oil, because currently, if you look at China's import of oil, that's about over 70% of the crude oil that China is currently using are from the import. So that means if we transfer a large part of the cost to the new energy vehicles, that means we will depend less on the importing of vehicle, but more depend on the electricity, which we are currently having a very large industry that includes the hydropower, the wind power, and the solar power. So that really draws the circle, the business circle. You produce electricity through the new energy, and you use new energy vehicles. And with all these developments, China has built a very large industry of new energy vehicles, from the battery, from the designing of the cars, all these kind of things. You can see all these wonderful cars selling at very cheap price. And the competitiveness of these, the quality of these products and the price of them as well, wins China a lot of market in the world.
And so, yeah, talking about China's role in terms of producing the battery or charging facilities, China actually has the largest EV battery makers in the world, the CATL. And Morgan Stanley recently raised the CATL's price target and forecasts, strong profits growth for this year. So tell us more about it. What is the uniqueness?
Right. So I think CATL is really, a very successful company in battery making. It was a relatively young company founded in 2011, but it is now accounting for 37% of all battery sales in the global market. It made, $40 billion sales in 2022, and that it's a 98% growth year on year. So why is it so successful? I think there are three main reasons. One is I think they really invested and produced the right type of battery, right? This is the lithium ion based battery. Instead of the other varieties like the nickel cobalt ones, they're more powerful, but it's more expensive and more liable to overheating. So I think they really invested in the right place, the right type of technology. And they're also taking leadership. There has been very innovative. They're now leading in the research in sodium ion technologies that would be really very helpful as the next generation batteries. And the second reason, I think, is because they're very competitive in trying to reduce their cost, trying to really find every way in their supply chain, in the entire production process to slash cost. Their cost has gone down, by 90%. That really gave them a lot of cost advantage. And again, the reason they're able to do that is because they invested so heavily in R&D. They have been spending, over $500 million in recent years in R&D, and that accounts for 7% of their turnover. And you compare that to, many companies, especially in the United States, that have been so-called financialized, trying to maximize shareholder values and put very little efforts in R&D. And so I think that really gives, again, CATL a really advantage. They have, many R&D staff, and so that is really the efforts. And then the third and last reason is because I think they have been really market savvy. They have formed strategic partnership with, car companies like BMW and Tesla. And so these companies provide really stable and quality demands for the products. And they're also having really good feedback mechanism, right, to basically allow CATL to continue to innovate and meet the market demand. So I think, all these reasons are very important for CATL's success. And I forgot to mention one last thing is, so in addition to forming, partnership with these downstream users of the batteries, CATL also invested very heavily in critical mineral, so in the upper stream of the production. So they have invested in lithium mines in Argentina, nickel mining and processing in Indonesia, and also cobalt in Congo. So in other words, they really have a very strategic partnership along the entire supply chain. So I think those are really the major reasons why it has been so successful.
So Jiahe, we talk about CATL or Cattle, the EV battery maker. And there is an article in the New York Times stressing that by the year 2030, China will make more than twice as many batteries as every other country combined. So what's your estimation? Will that be the case?
Well, we're pretty certain that China's battery, the using of new energy vehicle, it looks like it's actually growing up. And because we are now building more and more factories, which means with larger and larger scales of factories producing new energy vehicles and batteries, you have reducing per unit cost, because, that's what we call economics of scale, that you have larger scale, you have lower cost. So that's why Chinese government has been given a subsidy to new energy vehicles in the very start, but they start to reduce the subsidy in recent years because the cost has been reducing. The cost of new energy vehicles has actually been reducing, so they become more competitive in the market. So the government subsidy is gradually, taking away. But if you talk about China's composition of the global battery market in the next many years, it depends on another thing, is that the growth of the China's industry of battery looks like pretty clear. But the thing is that the share of the Chinese products in the world will also depend on how the other countries will be doing, because there has actually been a lot of debates in the industry saying that, do we really need that much new energy vehicles? And China said, yes, we definitely need that. But some other countries are actually they are doubting that. So they haven't really put in a lot of efforts into developing the new energy vehicle related stuff, like countries especially like Germany, United States. So they haven't really jumped in. So if they started to realize, 5 years later, okay, China is doing the right thing, we must follow them. They start building all these factories. So we're not sure about the share of the Chinese products in the world by that time. So it depends also on the other countries' actions.
So for China's EV maker, we have to mention BYD. So how do you think has BYD passed Tesla as the world's biggest EV seller?
Right. So I think, this has many different factors. So I agree to some degree what Jiahe was saying. I think, the Chinese government, the enterprises, and also the consumer base, all these are very major reasons for why, companies like BYD and other electric vehicle producers in China have been so successful. Chinese government has made these very strategic investments in, both the downstream, in terms of public charging facilities that really allow, consumers to be assured to purchase EVs. But they also have been, making investments in this critical mineral mines, and that helped with the, upstream inputs. And the enterprises like BYD, they have the long-term investment in batteries, in this EV technologies. So I think they have really good foresight in terms of, this is the industry to invest in. I think, back in 2010s, at the beginning, there are many economists were concerned about, is this the right industry to invest in? And I think, it turned out to be really a good choice. And so enterprises have been really innovative. It has been, really fierce competition within China. And that's why, you see over 100 models of different electric vehicles in any given year. So that really helped to, this kinds of innovation, right, really help companies like BYD to stay ahead of the market. And then finally, I think really the consumer base is very large. China has so many consumers. China basically sold over 30 million cars last year, and I think that will continue to grow. And also, I think, the Chinese consumers have a much less, the range anxiety compared to the United States, right? In the US, a survey has been done recently and showed that 47% of Americans didn't really show great enthusiasm in buying electric vehicles, because they worry they're not going to be driving them, over 500 miles before the next charge. And I think the Chinese consumers have a much higher tolerance in terms of the range. So I think all of these are the factors for the success of China's EV industries. And it's not just, of course, it's not just the government's subsidies and all of that. And what is interesting also, I think, for the EV industries is that, there is a scale effect, right? So the more you're able to produce, the more efficient you're going to become. So I think in that sense, the Chinese EV makers have already taken a lead role, and I think they will continue to really grow and become more innovative and efficient. But of course, the geopolitical barriers could be something as a sort of a hurdle. But I would argue EV is really important as the green transition is going to require. And I think EU has already made up their timeline, right? By 2035, all the cars that are sold needs to be zero emission. So I think that shows even though these countries start late, they would have to accelerate because that is really the future.
So Jiahe, so the Chinese tech giant Xiaomi recently says it will deliver its first EV this month, and it will leverage its shared operating system with the company's popular smartphone. So what are your thoughts on this smartphone maker entering the smart car manufacturing sector?
Well, it's not really a surprise for Xiaomi, because if you look at the products of this particular company, they basically produce everything, So it's actually quite a strange thing why they haven't entered the new energy vehicle for such a long time, and now they're just joining in. Because if you look at the products of Xiaomi, they basically produce everything for you: the smartphone, the computer, the air conditioner, the fridge, just everything. Your kettle, they just got every product, every electrical product. They just produce that. So they're now entering the new energy vehicle industry, and that's basically because they got enough money to do that, because Xiaomi is quite a large group and it's a successful listing company, so they got enough capital to try this market, and they want to expand into this market. Is no surprise to me at all, and expanding into this territory definitely brings them much more competition. The new energy vehicle industry in China right now is already a very competitive place. That's why we have so many warm forecasts, because there has been so many companies competing against each other to produce the best product that customers would like. Currently, the highest number of companies in China has been about 300 companies producing new energy vehicles, and you have about 10 brands that are really famous. So Xiaomi is now a newcomer, and well, let's see how their products will be.
Well, we're speaking with Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novem Archi Technologies, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And after a short break, we'll look at Japan's economy. Is it at a turning point? Stay with us.
I am Dan Wang, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank, China. The World Today is a real fun program. You will hear interesting people discussing global trend, economic event, what's happening in and outside of China. So, friends around the world, hope you can join us.
You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Japan's economy has narrowly avoided recession after revising its official economic growth figures. The new figures show that the country's GDP increased by 0.4% in the last 3 months of the year 2023 compared to a year earlier. This is up from earlier provisional data that showed a 0.4% contraction. Japan's economy has struggled with meager growth throughout several last decades. Despite the Japanese economy's struggles, Tokyo's stock market has been riding high since the beginning of this year. So Jiahe, so when we talk about Japan's economy, last decades is always the phrase people use to describe it. But why has Japan's economy been stagnant for 30 years?
Well, that's actually a question that many universities and professors have been researching, and you can find a few significant reasons behind that. The stagnating Japanese economic growth for around 3 decades, which is very long. The first reason is that Japan was actually pretty developed, back in 1990. Or we say 1989, when its economy hit the peak. I did a research. By that time, the per capita GDP of Japan was about 90% of the United States at that time. So that means they have actually lost the growth potential because if you look at economic growth, basically if you have a lower per capita GDP, that means you have much more potential to growth, and you can have very high growth rate like what China did in 1990. We got in the 1990s, we got like 15% or 18% per year. That was marvelous, but that was also because we got a pretty low growth to start with. And Japan was actually pretty developed back in the year of 1990. The second reason is that they haven't been dealing very well with their property bubble and their stock bubble. Japan had a really large bubble with almost all their financial assets back in the year of 1989. There was a saying at that time, sell the land in Tokyo at the market price, and you will be able to buy all the land in the United States. So they had really a large bubble, and when the financial bubble actually came down, it hurt the economy really well. So basically, these are the two reasons that Japan has been doing. And there is a third reason, which is that the growing of the Chinese economy has actually posed a strong competition for the Japanese products, especially in the past decade. So you can see that Japan is facing this strong competition from its neighbor countries, also including like South Korea, So these competition actually brought more pressure to the Japanese economy. So they got like 3 decades being lost.
So what about the Japan's economy now? Actually, Japan's economy has avoided recession very narrowly. So how do you view this revised GDP figure, and what does it tell us about the economy now?
So I think the recent change, has a lot also to do with the Japanese yuan's depreciation against the dollar. So when you look at in the yen value, Japan's GDP actually grew, to 591 trillion yen, which is up by 5.7% from 2023. But because the yen has depreciated close to 30% against the dollar, so when you convert that GDP into nominal dollar terms, that's why you show that there was a contraction. But the number got revised because it turned out the capital expenditure in the last quarter of 2023 actually increased by 2%. And so that largely, revised that sort of contraction. But I would say, though, it's still premature to say if this is really a pivot. It's going to be signaling a new growth trend, or this still, would be a temporary kind of improvement. I agree with Jiahe. I think, there are multiple reasons for why the Japanese economy has been stagnating in the past. They had the balance sheets recession. They are deleveraging. Companies are hesitant to invest. They also had a problem in terms of their innovability, partly due to geopolitical reasons that the United States basically, in a way, compelled Japan to give up its semiconductor industry. And Japan also became less innovative in digital economy, in also consumer electronics and so on. And, it was not able to compete. Then I think they also have the aging population. Over 30% of the Japanese population is over 65 years old. And so that lack of, labor, lack of demand, I think are still an important problem that is haunting the Japanese economy. Right now, we're looking at, private consumption. It's accounting for 60% of the Japanese economy, but it has fallen by 0.3% in the final quarter of 2023. So that means, Japanese economy is still facing the weak demand, and that needs to change if Japan wants to forge ahead. And also, they're keeping the wage growth very stagnant in the past 2 or 3 decades. So I think all these, in a way, wrong-headed policies would really constrain Japanese's growth momentum.
And so while the revised figure mean that Japan escaped the recession, it remains the world's 4th largest economy after losing the number 3 to Germany. So how do you explain that?
Right. So I also think this may not be a permanent change. I think, the two countries are very close. Japan's, it's $4.2 trillion. Germany was $4.5 trillion. And both countries similarly are facing very similar challenges like aging population, the lack of, public investment, especially in technologies and some of the critical infrastructure. I think those are common problems facing both countries. And I think Germany, now that they're in this fiscal debacle, they also are going to see very difficult times in their economic growth. Also with the energy crises that are still, I think, remaining as a potential challenge. So I think for both countries, they have similar challenges, and Japan, now that they're in this sort of new situation where they are now start to see inflation, which they have been wanting, right, for decades. But now they start to worry, that 2.2% of inflation rate recorded in January this year, what it means, right, to the Japanese central bank policies. So I think, they're in a very interesting moment where on the one hand, they're getting the inflation that they wanted. Hopefully that would help to, reflate the economy and boost more demand in terms of consumption demand, but also business investments. But at the same time, if they start to exit the ultra loose monetary policy, what would this mean for the economy?
So, Jiahe, so despite Japan's economy struggles, Tokyo stock market has been riding high since the beginning of this year. So how do you explain that?
Well, basically, there are a few reasons behind it. First is that the Tokyo's, the Nikkei 225 index has been rising, but if you look at the exchange rate between Japanese yen and USD, it has actually been falling. So that means for the global investors, not the Japanese investors, but the global investors, they're gaining from the Tokyo stock market is actually limited because, you got a very depreciating Japanese yen. But, the smart people like Warren Buffett, he has been doing pretty good because the money he used to buy the large 5 Japanese commercial companies actually being the money he actually borrowed from the Japanese bond market, which means he's actually exempted from this changing in the exchange rate market. So that's pretty good. But if you look at global investors, because of the depreciating of the Japanese yen, then you have a limited gaining from the stock market. Another thing is that if you look at Japan's stock market in the past 30 years, you can make money if you follow a certain pattern. You sell at the time when it hits PB ratio, well, the overall PB ratio of the stock index about 2 to 2.5 times, and you buy 1 or 0.9, 0.8 times. You just keep on doing that, sell high and buy low, and you keep on making money. And this time, before this bull market of the Japanese stock market, the valuation of the stock index has been hitting around 1 times PB ratio. So that's actually the time that was poised for a bull market in the Japanese market. That has been the experience in the past few decades.
Well, we're speaking with Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novum Archi Technologies, and Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.